Hello, my name is Colton Hayes, 65 years old, an old carpenter living quietly in the suburbs of Colorado Springs. The small house I live in is a source of pride, a legacy that my late wife Ellen and I built together in the 90s. Now, with Ellen gone due to a cruel heart condition 3 years ago, this house has become my final sanctuary, where I cling to the memories that remain. Every plank, every nail driven into the walls is imbued with the sweat, laughter, and tears of both of us. The house isn't grand or modern, but it's my entire world. A small, peaceful world where I can hear the wind whistling through the pine trees in the yard and smell the fresh wood from the small workshop behind the house. Every morning I wake up at 5, brew a strong cup of black coffee in an old worn-out pot, and head to my workshop. My hands, though calloused and trembling with age, still find solace in touching the grain of the wood. I sand, cut, carve, and assemble, each motion like a ritual, helping me forget the loneliness gnawing at my heart. I'm not wealthy, but I get by. Savings from years of hard work, combined with a modest pension, are enough to sustain my simple life. I don't need much, just this house, this workshop, and Ellen's keepsakes, especially the wooden box I carved for her when we were newlyweds, where she kept the love letters I wrote in my youth. But life, as I've learned over the years, never lets you stay comfortable for too long. It was a chilly autumn day when golden pine needles were falling gently onto the path leading to my house. I was sanding a chair leg in the workshop when I heard a car pull up at the gate. A short honk startled me. I wiped my hands on my old apron, stepped into the yard, and saw a glossy white SUV parked at the entrance. The car door opened, and Daniel, my only son, stepped out with a radiant smile. Beside him was Laura, his wife, with her shimmering blonde hair and a fitted wool dress, looking like she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. "Dad!" Daniel called loudly, waving as if we hadn't seen each other in a decade, though in truth he's been visiting regularly, especially over the past 3 years. "Daniel, Laura," I nodded, forcing a smile. "What's with the surprise visit? No heads up at all?" "Wanted to surprise you," Daniel replied, stepping forward to hug me. He's a head taller than me, with dark brown hair like his mother's and sparkling blue eyes full of life. "Besides, we have something important to talk about." I invited them inside. My small kitchen suddenly felt cramped with their presence. Laura sat in the old armchair, her eyes scanning the room with curiosity, as if appraising every item. Daniel placed a bottle of wine on the table, an expensive kind I knew I'd never drink. "For you," he said, then sat across from me. "We think it's time for a change, Dad." "Change?" I frowned, a sense of unease creeping in. "Change what?" Laura spoke up, her voice sweet as honey, but each word carefully measured. "Dad, we're worried about you. You're living alone out here, far from the city, with no one to look after you. What if something happens? A heart attack, a small accident. Who would help you?" I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm fine, Laura. I'm as strong as an ox. Besides, I've got my workshop and good neighbors. I'm not lonely." Daniel leaned forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "But Dad, we want you to live more comfortably. A modern, convenient life. In downtown Colorado Springs, we found a beautiful apartment, spacious with an elevator, close to the hospital and supermarket. You wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore." I sipped my coffee, trying to stay calm. "Sounds nice, but this house is my life with your mother. I don't want to leave." Laura exchanged a glance with Daniel, then smiled, a smile that made me feel like I was being lured into an invisible trap. "Dad, we understand, but think about it. You deserve a better life. We want you closer so we can take care of you for the rest of your life. No worries about fixing plumbing, shoveling snow, or anything else. We'll handle it all." Her words were soft and persuasive, but something about the way she emphasized, "take care of you for the rest of your life," made my heart beat faster. I looked at Daniel, hoping to find sincerity in his eyes, but he just nodded as if he'd rehearsed this conversation. "Dad, we've thought it all through," Daniel continued. "You could sell this house. Real estate prices here are rising and you'd get a good sum. We'd use that money to put a down payment on the new apartment, furnish it, and make sure you have the best of everything. You'd live with us like a real family. I stayed silent, looking around the kitchen. The oak table I made for Ellen still stood there with small scratches from family dinners long ago. Our wedding photo hung on the wall. Ellen in her simple white dress, her smile as radiant as autumn sunlight. Sell this house? It felt like I was being asked to give up my very heart. I'll think about it, I said, my voice hoarse. This isn't simple. Laura placed her hand on mine, a gentle but cold touch. Dad, we only want what's best for you. Trust us. In the days that followed, Daniel and Laura kept calling, texting, and even visiting a few more times. Each time they brought sweet words and visions of an easier, more comfortable life. Dad, you've worked hard your whole life, Daniel said during one dinner. It's time to rest and let us take care of you. Laura talked about the apartment they'd seen, with large windows overlooking the Cheyenne Mountains, a spacious living room, and a private room for me. You'll have your own space, she said, her eyes sparkling as if picturing the scene. We'll be a happy family. I started to waver, not because I didn't love this house, but because I missed Ellen. I missed the days when we dreamed of a big family full of children and grandchildren. Daniel was our only child, and after Ellen passed, he was all I had left. I wanted to believe he truly cared, that he wanted to make up for the years we'd been apart. When he left for college, then built his career in Denver, only occasionally visiting. One evening, as I sat alone in my workshop looking at Ellen's wooden box, I thought of what she once said. Colton, family is the most important thing. No matter what, keep them close. Her words echoed in my mind, a reminder that perhaps it was time to let go of the past and be closer to my son. I called Daniel. All right, I said, my voice trembling. I'll sell the house. The sale happened faster than I expected. A local real estate company valued the house at $560,000, more than I ever imagined. I signed the papers, watched strangers walk through and touch the walls Ellen and I had built. Each step of the process felt like a knife slicing into my heart. But Daniel and Laura were always there, comforting me, promising a brighter future. Dad, we'll use this money wisely, Daniel said as we sat in the notary's office. We've found the perfect apartment. But for the down payment and renovations, we need you to transfer $300,000 to the family account first. The rest, we'll keep safe for you. For expenses, healthcare, insurance, everything you need. I nodded, though a flicker of doubt lingered. What was this family account? I'd never heard Daniel mention it before. But Laura quickly chimed in, her voice soft but convincing. Dad, this is how we manage our finances. It's all transparent. You won't have to worry about a thing. I signed the transfer papers, watching $300,000 leave my account. It was the largest sum I'd ever seen, and I believed it would secure a new life closer to my son. The remaining $260,000 I kept in a separate account, but Daniel and Laura kept subtly mentioning additional costs. Dad, the renovations are pricier than expected. Or Dad, we need a bit more for better health insurance for the family. I didn't question much. I trusted Daniel, trusted Laura, trusted that they truly wanted to care for me as they promised. The new apartment was in a high-rise in downtown Colorado Springs with gleaming glass walls and marble-tiled hallways. When I walked in, suitcase in hand, I felt out of place. Everything was too modern, too foreign. My room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the bustling street. Laura gave me a tour, pointing out expensive fixtures. See, Dad? We chose the best to make you comfortable. Daniel patted my shoulder. Welcome to your new life, Dad. I smiled, trying to feel the joy they spoke of. But deep down, I felt an emptiness. Ellen's wooden box tucked in my suitcase was the only thing that made me feel connected to myself. I didn't know that in just a few months everything I trusted would come crashing down, and I'd be pushed out of the very life I'd sacrificed everything to have. In the early days at the new apartment, I tried to adjust. The small room Daniel and Laura had set aside for me was tucked in a corner of the apartment, furnished with a single bed, a cheap particle board dresser, and a window overlooking the noisy street below. The constant sounds of traffic, horns, and passers-by were a stark contrast to the quiet of my old house in the suburbs. I missed the sound of the wind rustling through the pine trees, the smell of fresh wood in my workshop, and the peaceful mornings when Ellen and I would sit on the porch sipping coffee and talking about our simple dreams. But I told myself this was my new life. Daniel and Laura had promised to take care of me, and I had to trust them. After all, they were my family, the only thing I had left after Ellen's passing. The apartment was undeniably luxurious. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a view of the distant Cheyenne Mountains, and the furnishings gleamed with a polish that made me afraid to touch anything for fear of leaving smudges. Laura proudly pointed out every detail: an imported Italian leather sofa, a sparkling crystal chandelier, and a small bar in the living room stocked with bottles of liquor I didn't know the names of. "We wanted this place to be perfect," she said, her smile radiant but her eyes cold as if gauging my reaction. Daniel was busier, often absent due to work. He said he was with some finance company, but the details were vague. Whenever I asked, he'd just laugh and say, "Don't worry, Dad. I'm working on big things. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. I started noticing something was off just a few weeks after moving in. Laura frequently called in contractors to renovate the apartment, from installing smart lighting systems to replacing the hardwood floors. Each time she'd mention the money from the sale of my house. "Dad, we need a bit more to pay the contractors," she'd say, her voice gentle but leaving no room for objection. "This apartment is for all of us, right?" I nodded, though unease began to stir inside me. The $300,000 I'd transferred to the family account, an account I had no access to, had been used for the down payment on the apartment. Now they were asking me to keep dipping into the remaining funds for other expenses. Daniel was changing too. He spoke to me less, and when he did, it was just cursory questions. "How's your appetite, Dad? Need anything?" He no longer sat down to chat like he used to when he was a kid, always hovering around me in the workshop, curiously watching me carve wood. Now he was always glued to his phone, engrossed in long calls I couldn't follow. Once, I overheard him on the phone. "Yes, I'll transfer another sum soon. This project needs a lot of capital." I didn't know what the project was, but the way he glanced at me when he realized I was nearby made my heart clench. The remaining money in my personal account, $260,000, was dwindling. Laura always had a reason to withdraw funds. Sometimes it was better health insurance for you, Dad. Other times, shared living expenses or furniture for the apartment. I wasn't great with numbers, but I knew I wasn't spending that much. One evening, when I checked my account, it was down to less than $100,000. I confronted Laura, trying to keep my voice calm. "Why is so much money being withdrawn? I need details." She looked at me, her eyes widening as if hurt. "Dad, we're taking care of the whole family. What do you think we're doing with that money? Splurging on nonsense? It's all for you, for this apartment." Daniel stood nearby, nodding in agreement, but his eyes avoided mine. I wanted to believe them, but the unease in my heart grew, like a storm brewing on the horizon. 6 months passed, and everything collapsed faster than I could have imagined. One morning, I received a bank notification. My account had only $15,000 left. I stood frozen in my small room, phone in hand, my heart pounding as if it might explode. Over $500,000, the savings from a lifetime of work and the money from the house Ellen and I built with sweat and love, was nearly gone. I rushed to the living room where Laura was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone with a glass of wine in hand. "Laura," I said, my voice trembling, "where's my money? Why is there only $15,000 left?" She looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. "Dad, we've told you. That money went toward buying this apartment, renovating it, covering expenses. Did you think $1 million place like this comes cheap? $1 million? I repeated, my mind reeling. But you said it was just $300,000. Daniel walked into the room, likely hearing my raised voice. "Dad, calm down," he said, his tone low but lacking sincerity. "We invested that money to secure our future. Part of it went into a business venture, but the market's been tough. I'll make it up later." "Make it up?" I nearly shouted. "Daniel, that was my money. Money from the house I built with your mother. You had no right to use it without my consent." Laura stood, setting her wine glass down on the table with a cold clink. "Dad, you're overreacting," she said. "We've done everything for you to give you a better life. What do you think we want? To scam you?" She let out a scornful laugh that felt like a slap to my face. "If you're not happy, you can leave anytime." I looked at Daniel, hoping he'd say something, defend me, apologize, but he just lowered his head, silent. In that moment, I realized I had placed my trust in the wrong people. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my bed, clutching Ellen's wooden box, flipping through the old letters I wrote to her in our youth. "I'll give you the world, Ellen," I had written, "as long as you're by my side." Now my world had been stolen, not by a thief on the street, but by my own son and the daughter-in-law I once saw as a daughter. The next morning, Laura walked into my room dragging a suitcase, the same one I'd brought when I moved in. "Dad, we think you should find somewhere else," she said, her voice icy. "This apartment isn't right for you. You're too old-fashioned, messy. We can't keep taking care of you forever." I stared at her, unable to believe my ears. "Laura, this place was bought with my money. You can't just kick me out like this." She shrugged, casting me a disdainful look. "This apartment is in my name, Dad. You have nothing here. We tried, but you're just a freeloader." Her words stabbed my heart like a knife. I looked at Daniel standing in the doorway, but he just hung his head, saying nothing. I knew it was over. That day it poured rain. I dragged my suitcase out of the apartment, clutching Ellen's wooden box under my raincoat. I felt like I was stepping into darkness. I had nowhere to go, no house deeds, no bank account, nothing but $15,000 and my wife's keepsakes. I wandered to a nearby bus station, huddling under its awning, watching the rain fall. The sound of the rain mingled with my own sobs, but I wasn't crying for the money. I was crying for Daniel, the son I had loved more than myself. After a few nights sleeping at the bus station, I found a rundown motel in the suburbs. The room was small and musty, with a creaking bed and peeling walls. I placed Ellen's wooden box on the table, opened it, and found an old letter I'd written to her during our courtship. In it, I talked about my dream of opening a woodworking shop to teach homeless kids, a dream I'd buried long ago. Reading those words, I felt a small spark ignite in my heart. Maybe, just maybe, I still had a chance to start over. The first days in the rundown motel in the suburbs of Colorado Springs felt like I had hit rock bottom. The tiny room, with its musty smell clinging to every corner, was like a rotting wooden box. The bed creaked with every movement, and the flickering neon light on the ceiling seemed as exhausted as I was. But what hurt most wasn't the deprivation. It was the betrayal by my own flesh and blood. Daniel, the son I had raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for, had turned his back on me. Laura, with her sweet smile and empty promises, had stolen not just my money, but also my last shred of trust in family. I sat in that room, clutching Ellen's wooden box, the only remnant of happier days. Every night I opened it, rereading the old letters I'd written to her decades ago. One letter, with the shaky handwriting of my youth, made me pause longer than usual. "Ellen, I want to open a woodworking shop, not just to make furniture, but to teach homeless kids. I want to give them a chance, the way you gave me a chance by loving me." That dream, long buried under years of toil and responsibilities as a husband and father, now stirred within me like a small flame flickering in a pile of ashes. I started with the smallest steps. In the motel room, I had no workshop or proper tools, but I still had my hands and the experience of an old carpenter. Using $500 from my dwindling savings, I bought a basic set of tools from a second-hand shop. A handsaw, a chisel, and a few pieces of cheap wood. That was all I had. I began making small items, wooden boxes, mini bookshelves, and tiny armchairs like the ones I used to make for Ellen to decorate our kitchen corner. Each chisel strike, each saw cut, felt like rediscovering myself. My hands trembled with age, but they still remembered how to work, still found joy in shaping each piece of wood. I didn't know what to do with the items. Sell them? Give them away? I wasn't familiar with business, and the $15,000 in my account was shrinking daily. One afternoon, while sitting in a small cafe near the motel, a place I frequented to save electricity and soak in some warmth, I overheard a young woman at the next table talking about Etsy. You just take photos of your products, post them, and people from all over the world can buy them, she said to her friend, her voice brimming with excitement. I listened, intrigued. Back at the motel, I borrowed an old phone from a fellow tenant, took some clumsy photos of my wooden boxes, and posted them on Etsy. I named the shop Hayes Handcrafted, the name Ellen had suggested when we used to dream of starting our own brand. For the first few weeks, no one bought anything. I wasn't surprised. Who would buy from an unknown old man online? But I didn't give up. I started recording short videos on the borrowed phone, showing how to make a vintage wooden chair, the kind I'd made for Daniel when he was young. My voice was hoarse, sometimes cracking with emotion, but I tried to share my story about the days Ellen and I worked in the workshop, about the joy of creating something with my own hands. I uploaded the videos to YouTube, not expecting much, just hoping that if someone watched, they might understand the heart of a carpenter. Life at the motel wasn't easy. Rent, food, and materials stretched my budget to the limit. Some days I ate only bread with peanut butter and drank water to save money. Some nights I lay awake thinking about Daniel and Laura, wondering if they ever regretted treating me this way. But each time I opened Ellen's wooden box, I found the strength to keep going. "Colton, you're stronger than you think," she'd once said. And I wanted to prove she was right. Then one day a miracle happened. One of my videos, the one showing how to make the vintage chair, started gaining attention. I don't know why. Maybe it was my warm, gravelly voice or my old, skilled hands on the screen. The video was shared, then went viral. Comments began pouring in. "This old man is amazing. I want to learn to make a chair like that. Your story touched me." I read each one, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in months, I felt seen. Orders on Etsy started coming in. First a few wooden boxes, then some bookshelves. I worked day and night, my hands aching but my heart lighter. I rented a small corner of a nearby warehouse to use as a workshop, buying better tools and higher quality wood. The money I earned wasn't much, but it was enough to cover rent and eat decently. More importantly, I felt alive again. Nearly a year later, my videos had tens of thousands of views, and my YouTube channel started generating a small income from ads. One day, I received an email from a stranger named Mark Thompson, who introduced himself as a small-scale investor in Colorado Springs. He wrote, "I've watched your videos and I'm impressed by your story and talent. I'd like to support you in opening a community woodworking shop where you can teach struggling young people. What do you think?" I read the email over and over, unable to believe my eyes. A community woodworking shop. It was the dream I'd written about in my letters to Ellen. I called Mark and we met at a small cafe. He was a middle-aged man dressed simply but with sharp, perceptive eyes. "Colton," he said, "I see a passion in you that the world needs more of. I'll invest $50,000 to help you get started, not a loan, a gift. I just want you to pursue your dream." I shook his hand, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you, Mark. I won't let you down." With Mark's money, I rented a small warehouse in the suburbs of Colorado Springs and named it Hayes Workshop. I began recruiting homeless or struggling teenagers from the area, teaching them how to hold a saw, measure wood, and turn a rough plank into something beautiful. The kids, initially wary, gradually opened up. I told them about Ellen, about my failures, and about how I found myself again. "You don't have to be good right away," I told them. "You just have to keep going." Hayes' workshop became more than a workplace. It was where I rediscovered meaning in life. Each chair, each table we finished felt like rebuilding a piece of my broken heart. I thought less about Daniel and Laura. They had taken my money, but they couldn't take who I was, the carpenter, the husband, the father who once dreamed of a better world. The months at Hayes' workshop passed like a dream I never dared to imagine. Each morning I woke up with a sense of excitement, as if I weren't a 65-year-old man with calloused hands and a once broken heart, but a young man starting life anew. My workshop wasn't grand, just an old warehouse with a rusty tin roof and stained concrete walls, but it was filled with laughter, the sound of saws cutting through wood, and the fragrant scent of pine resin. The kids I taught, from skinny boys with wary eyes to shy girls hesitant to hold a hammer, gradually became my new family. They called me Mr. Hayes, and every time I heard that name, I felt like Ellen was smiling somewhere, proud of me. But I never expected that what I was doing, the clumsy YouTube videos I posted and the simple wooden items on Etsy, would lead me to a new turning point, one I hadn't prepared for. It all started with a small article in a local Colorado Springs Gazeta. A young journalist named Emily with curly hair and bright eyes visited my workshop after watching my YouTube videos. She said she was captivated by my story, a man who lost everything but still stood up and found a way to help others. "Mr. Hayes," she said, pen poised in hand, "I want to write about you, about this workshop, about the kids you're helping. People need to know your story." I laughed, shaking my head. "Young lady, there's nothing special about me. I'm just an old man working with wood." But Emily wouldn't give up. She stayed all day watching me teach a boy named Miguel how to sand a piece of wood until it was smooth as silk. She took photos, jotted down notes, and even recorded a short video as I told the kids how Ellen used to encourage me to pursue my passion. "Don't let anyone tell you you're not good enough," I said to them. And Emily, standing in the corner, quickly wiped away a tear. Her article was published a week later, titled, "The Old Carpenter and His Dream to Change Lives." I read it in my small motel room, my heart pounding. Emily had brought my story to life, from the days I lost my house and was betrayed by my son and daughter-in-law, to the creation of Hayes' workshop. She didn't mention Daniel or Laura. I'd asked her to keep that part private. But she wrote about my pain with a sincerity that left me choked up. "Colton Hayes doesn't just make beautiful wooden furniture," the article concluded. "He's building hope for forgotten youth." The article was like a stone dropped into a still lake. Within days, my phone, an old second-hand model I'd bought from a friend, buzzed nonstop with messages and emails. Local nonprofits reached out, wanting to collaborate with Hayes' workshop. Schools invited me to speak to students about woodworking and perseverance. Even a local TV station called, offering to film a segment about me. I was stunned, unsure how to respond. All I wanted was to work with wood, teach the kids, and live a quiet life. But it seemed fate had other plans. The TV segment aired on a Saturday evening. I sat in my motel room watching on a tiny TV borrowed from the landlord, seeing myself on the screen. The image of me in an old shirt standing in the workshop, guiding a girl named Sarah on how to hold a chisel, felt so foreign I could hardly believe it was me. My voice, hoarse but full of emotion, rang out, "Life can take a lot from you, but it can't take your hands or your heart. As long as you keep trying, you'll always find a way." After the segment, social media exploded. My YouTube channel's views skyrocketed from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands in just a week. Comments flooded in. "Mr. Hayes is an inspiration. I want to come to Colorado Springs to learn woodworking. Thank you for giving me hope." I read each one, tears streaming down my face. I never thought my story, an old man betrayed, cast out, and starting over, could touch others' hearts. Orders on Etsy surged. I couldn't keep up with the demand, so I began teaching the kids in the workshop how to finish products for sale. Each wooden box, each chair bore the Hayes Workshop label, a mark of resilience and hope. I used the earnings to pay the kids, buy more tools, and improve the workshop. Mark Thompson, the investor who helped me start, called to congratulate me. "Colton, I knew you'd do it," he said, his voice full of pride. "But I didn't expect you'd do it this well." With the growing attention, I decided to expand Hayes' workshop. I rented an additional section of the warehouse next door, bought more equipment, and took on more students. The kids who came to me weren't just homeless. Some were young people struggling with life, dropouts, or those who'd gotten into trouble or simply lost their way. I taught them not just how to work with wood, but how to believe in themselves. "You don't have to be good right away," I said, repeating the phrase I'd said hundreds of times, "but you have to start to be great." One day, while I was going over the books, a task I was never good at, Miguel, the first boy I taught, walked into the small office in the workshop. He held a piece of paper with a sketch of a dining table adorned with intricate patterns. "Mr. Hayes," he said shyly, "I designed this. I think we could make and sell it." I looked at the drawing, then at the boy. Miguel, with his messy hair and bright eyes, was no longer the timid kid he'd been. "Great work, Miguel," I said, patting his shoulder. "We'll make this table, and you'll lead the project." He grinned, the brightest smile I'd ever seen. In that moment, I felt I'd done something bigger than building a workshop. I was helping these kids find their own worth. 2 years after being kicked out of Daniel and Laura's apartment, I stood in front of Hayes' workshop, now freshly painted, with a wooden sign carved with CH Holdings, the small company I'd formed to manage the workshop and orders. I was no longer the homeless old man with $15,000 in his pocket. I had a steady income, a passionate team of students, and a supportive community. The media called me a senior entrepreneur, but I just saw myself as a carpenter trying to live up to the dream I shared with Ellen. One morning, while checking emails, a message from Emily startled me. She included a link to a real estate website listing a familiar apartment, the one Daniel and Laura had bought with my money. The bank had foreclosed on it because they couldn't pay the loan. I read it over and over, my heart pounding. That apartment, a symbol of betrayal, was now up for public auction. I sat down, my hands trembling, not out of anger or a desire for revenge, but from a strange feeling, as if fate was giving me a chance to rewrite my own story. I took a sip of coffee, trying to organize my thoughts. 3 years ago, I left that apartment with a suitcase and Ellen's wooden box with nothing to my name but $15,000. Now, I was the owner of CH Holdings, a small but growing company with steady income from Hayes' workshop and Etsy orders. I wasn't rich, but I was in a position to consider a bold move. The idea of buying back the apartment, the one purchased with my own money, filled me with both excitement and fear. It wasn't just about the money. It was a chance to confront my past, to face Daniel and Laura, and to prove they couldn't destroy me. I contacted the real estate company handling the auction. The agent, a middle-aged woman named Susan with a professional yet friendly voice, said over the phone, "This apartment is a steal, Mr. Hayes. The starting bid is only $750,000, well below market value. But you'll need to act fast. There's a lot of interest." $750,000, I repeated, feeling a weight on my chest. It was a huge sum, larger than any investment I'd ever considered. But I knew the apartment's true value, nearly $1 million when Daniel and Laura bought it, and the Colorado Springs real estate market was still hot. If I could buy it, it wouldn't just be reclaiming what I'd lost. It would be a smart investment for CH Holdings. I checked the company and personal accounts. Hayes' workshop had been generating steady profits, and I had savings from online orders. In total, I could scrape together about $400,000 in cash. The rest I'd have to borrow from the bank, a thought that made me shudder, as I'd never liked being in debt. But as I looked at Ellen's wooden box on the table, I remembered her words. "Colton, sometimes you have to take a risk to get what you want." I took a deep breath, called Susan back and said, "I want to bid, but I need to keep my identity confidential." Susan hesitated. "Confidential? That can be arranged, but you'll need a company or representative to bid under. Are you prepared for that? CH Holdings will bid, I replied firmly. On a rainy afternoon, Susan called. Congratulations, Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice brimming with excitement. CH Holdings won the auction. The apartment is yours. I sank into my chair, hands trembling. Thank you, Susan, I said, but my mind was reeling. I had done it. The apartment, the symbol of betrayal, where I'd been called a freeloader, now belonged to me. But I knew the story wasn't over. Daniel and Laura were still living there, and I had a plan. Susan gave me more details. Daniel and Laura, now with a 1-year-old child, didn't want to leave the apartment. They were trying to negotiate with the new owner to rent it. I smiled when I heard this. Not out of joy, but because I saw an opportunity to send a message. I told Susan, draft a lease agreement, but set the rent at 3 times the market rate. 3 times? Susan sounded shocked. Mr. Hayes, that's a very high price. They might not agree. They'll have to decide, I said, my voice calm but resolute. Send them the contract and don't reveal I'm the owner. I wasn't doing this out of hatred. I didn't want to ruin Daniel and Laura's lives, but I wanted them to feel the consequences of their actions. They had taken everything from me, not just money, but my trust and hope. Now I wanted them to understand that I was no longer the frail old man they'd exploited. A few days later, Susan called back, her voice slightly tense. They received the contract, but Laura's furious. She says the rent is outrageously high, almost impossible to afford. They want to meet the owner to negotiate directly. No meeting, I replied immediately. All communication goes through you. If they don't agree, they can move out. I knew Laura would push back. She was always confident, always believing she could manipulate any situation with her smile and sweet words. But this time, she didn't know who she was up against. I imagined her and Daniel sitting in the apartment, arguing over the lease, worrying about their future. Part of me felt a pang of sorrow, especially for their child, my grandchild, whom I'd never met. But I couldn't let emotions sway me. This was a lesson they needed to learn. One afternoon, as I was guiding a student on how to carve patterns into a wooden box, my phone rang. It was Susan. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice hesitant. Daniel reached out to me. He's very stressed and insists on meeting the apartment's owner in person. He's practically begging. Laura, on the other hand, is threatening to sue, but I think she's just trying to apply pressure. I paused, setting down the chisel. What exactly did they say? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Daniel said they can't afford the new rent. They have a young child and don't want to leave because they're used to the apartment. Laura, well, she called the rent extortion and threatened to take it to the press or court. But I told them the contract is clear and the owner, you, has full authority. I fell silent for a moment, feeling a wave rising in my chest. Daniel begging, Laura fighting back. I wasn't surprised. That was their nature. Daniel, always weak and easily led by Laura, and Laura, sharp and willing to use any means to get her way. But this time they didn't know they were dealing with me, the old man they once called a freeloader. Let them do what they want, I told Susan, but I won't meet them. Everything goes according to the contract. Susan sighed over the phone. All right, Mr. Hayes, I'll pass that along. But I don't think they'll give up easily. I hung up, looking out the workshop window. The pine trees outside swayed in the wind just like they did back at my old house with Ellen. I wondered if I was being too harsh. Daniel was my son despite his betrayal. And their child, my grandchild, was an innocent soul. But then I remembered that rainy night when Laura tossed my suitcase at me when Daniel stood silent. No, this wasn't about revenge. I was doing this so they'd learn that actions have consequences. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I was at the workshop inspecting a new batch of wood when my assistant knocked on the office door. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice uncertain. There's a man here to see you. He says his name is Daniel. He looks very stressed. My heart skipped a beat. Daniel, here. I hadn't expected him to track me down at the workshop. I'd been careful to keep my identity hidden during the auction, but perhaps he'd researched CH Holdings and found me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Let him in," I said, my voice lower than usual. Daniel walked in, and for a moment I barely recognized him. He looked far more worn than the last time I saw him. Disheveled hair, dark circles under his eyes, and a crumpled suit as if he'd worn it for days. But what struck me most was his eyes, no longer confident or indifferent as they were when he watched Laura kick me out. Instead, they were filled with desperation. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "It's you, isn't it? The owner of CH Holdings? It's you." I didn't answer right away. I stood, walked to the meeting table, and said, "Sit down, Daniel," gesturing to the chair across from me. My voice was calm, but inside I was fighting to keep my emotions in check. "Why are you here?" Daniel sat, his hands clasped tightly together. "Dad, I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I know what Laura and I did was wrong. I let her take the lead, let things go too far, but Dad, we're struggling. I lost my job, Laura's business failed. The bank's taking the apartment, and now the rent. We can't afford it. I'm begging you, please help us. For our daughter, for your granddaughter." His words cut like a knife, not because I pitied him, but because I thought of the grandchild I'd never met. I looked at Daniel, searching for the boy who used to follow me around the workshop, laughing as I taught him to hold a saw. But that boy was gone, replaced by a weak man who'd betrayed his father for Laura's promises. "You think an apology can erase everything?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. "You and Laura took everything from me. The house, the money, my trust. You stood by while she threw me out on the street. Now you're begging, but did you think of me back then?" Daniel bowed his head, tears streaming down his face. "I know I was wrong, Dad. I regret it every day, but we have nothing left. I don't want my daughter to end up on the street." I looked at him in silence. Part of me wanted to reach out, to help him, to hold the grandchild I'd never seen. But then I remembered Ellen's words. "Colton, love doesn't mean letting others walk all over you." I'd given Daniel too many chances, and he'd thrown them away. "Daniel," I said slowly, "I don't hate you. But I can't help you this time. You and Laura need to face the consequences of what you've done. I won't lower the rent. If you can't pay, move out." Daniel looked up, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "Dad, you'd really do this? To your own son?" I didn't answer. I stood, opened the door, and gestured for him to leave. As Daniel walked out, I saw his shoulders shaking with sobs. I closed the door, sat down, and clutched Ellen's wooden box. I didn't cry, but my heart felt heavy. Meanwhile, Laura didn't stay quiet. Susan called a few days later, her voice laced with concern. "Mr. Hayes, Laura contacted a lawyer. She's saying she'll sue CH Holdings for extortion and threatens to expose your story, that you were once homeless living at a bus station. She thinks it'll damage your reputation." I let out a dry laugh. Laura was true to form, always looking for a weak spot to exploit. But she didn't know I was prepared. Right after buying the apartment, I'd hired a lawyer to review all documents related to the money I'd transferred to Daniel and Laura. I had evidence of how they withdrew funds from the family account, how they used the money from my house sale to buy the apartment in Laura's name. If she wanted to play the legal game, I was ready. "Send a letter from my lawyer to Laura," I told Susan. "Attach the documents proving their misappropriation of my assets. Let her know that if she wants to sue, I'll countersue, and I have enough evidence to win." Susan followed through. A week later, I got word that Laura had dropped all threats. She and Daniel agreed to pay the tripled rent, though I knew they were borrowing heavily to manage. I didn't feel triumphant, only a sense of emptiness. They'd chosen this path, and now they had to face it. Time passed, and I heard that Daniel and Laura were starting to clash. Susan told me that during one of her visits to check on the apartment, Laura had yelled at Daniel right in front of her, blaming him for letting things come to this. I wasn't surprised. Laura had always been the one in control, with Daniel following her lead. But as money ran dry and pressure mounted, cracks in their relationship began to show. One morning, Susan called, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Hayes, I just heard some news. Daniel and Laura, they've divorced." I sat down, my hand tightening around my coffee mug. Divorced? I didn't know how to feel, sad, relieved, or just empty. Daniel was my son, but he had chosen his path. Laura, with all her sharpness and ambition, had finally failed to hold everything together as she'd wanted. I asked Susan, "How are they now?" "What about the child?" "Laura moved away, probably to Denver," Susan replied. "Daniel's still in the apartment, but only temporarily. He says he can't afford the rent anymore. The child, a little girl named Emma, is with him, but I hear he's struggling." Emma, my granddaughter's name. I pictured a little girl with Daniel's blue eyes, Ellen's eyes, and my heart tightened. I didn't want to see Daniel, didn't want to reopen the door I'd firmly closed. But Emma was different. She bore no blame for what had happened. One evening, as I was locking up the workshop, a figure appeared at the entrance. I recognized Daniel immediately. He looked far older than the last time I saw him. Hair speckled with gray, shoulders slumped, and in his arms was a tiny girl about 1 year old with rosy cheeks and curly brown hair. "Emma." I stood frozen, unsure of what to say. Daniel looked at me, his eyes filled with exhaustion and regret. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse, "I don't know where else to go. Laura left. I have no job, no money. I want you to help, not for me, but for Emma." I looked down at the little girl. Emma gazed up at me, her big round eyes full of curiosity, then smiled, a carefree smile that reminded me of Ellen. I knelt down, gently touching her cheek. "Hello, Emma," I said, my voice catching. "You're my granddaughter." Daniel bowed his head, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know I don't deserve it, but I don't want Emma to suffer." I stood looking at him. In that moment, I saw not the man who had betrayed me, but a desperate father. I no longer felt anger toward him, but I couldn't forget what had happened. "Daniel," I said, my voice low but clear, "I'll take care of Emma. I'll give her a home, a family, but you have to stand on your own. I won't let you lean on me anymore." Daniel nodded, saying nothing more. I took him and Emma to the small house I'd recently bought in the mountains not far from Colorado Springs. It was a simple home, not as glamorous as Daniel and Laura's apartment, but warm and filled with memories of Ellen. I set up a corner of the room for Emma, buying a small crib and a few toys. Daniel stayed for a few days, but I made it clear he had to rebuild his life. "You've made mistakes, but you still have time to fix them," I told him. "Do it for Emma." Daniel left soon after, promising to find a job and return when he was stable. I didn't know if he'd keep his word, but I still hoped my son would succeed, or at least stand on his own 2 feet. And that's the story of my life that I wanted to share with you, the story of a 65-year-old man who stood firm through the storms and betrayals of family. Thank you for listening, and I wish you a peaceful and happy day.